What made the weird kid at your school weird? At my school, the weird kid was this guy who used to bring a pet lizard in his pocket every single day. Like, he wasn't sneaky about it either. He'd pull it out in the middle of class and just casually let it chill on his desk. He also talked to it like it was a person, and once told everyone the lizard gave him advice on life. Honestly, it was kinda iconic, but at the time, everyone just thought it was super weird. That's a pretty unique story. I remember a kid like that in my school too. He had a pet rabbit he'd carry around. Didn't matter where we were, it was always with him. People thought it was odd, but he didn't care. He was just being himself. Looking back, it's kind of refreshing that some people can just embrace their quirks like that. Makes the school experience a little more interesting. Well, for one, he stockpiled an entire desk full of spoons from the lunch cafeteria over the course of several months, all clean. Then one day they all fell out. He was strange, but pretty harmless. That's a weird move. I get collecting stuff, but spoons? Seems like he had a thing for them. Must have been a sight when they all spilled out. Can't say I know anyone else who'd pull that off. At least he wasn't causing any trouble, just a quirky habit. Makes you wonder what other odd things people do when no one's looking. He was obese, with greasy hair and body odor. He was smart but weird. Years later we got in touch through FB and he told me how difficult things had been in school, growing up with no father and a mentally ill mother. That's a lesson to learn. Sometimes the weird kid seems weird because they're doing their best to try and live in a bad situation. Yeah, it can be tough to see what someone's really going through, especially when we judge them based on surface stuff. That friend's experience is a reminder to be more understanding. Everyone has their battles, and sometimes the ones acting odd have the hardest fights behind the scenes. It's easy to overlook that in school life. Just shows we should be kinder to each other. So, I have a great story. We had a bit of a weird kid we called Storyteller. He was always making up stories that were really far-fetched, but he swore they were all true. This was in the 90s. For example, his dad was a German spy. He himself, at 14, was already working on some classified computer stuff that he couldn't talk about. Also, he was dating a German model. And so on. Well, a few years ago I randomly moved in across the street from him. He's fully retired from a cushy IT job when he was like 45 and he's married to a smoking hot German woman. That's funny how things turn out. You think he's just making stuff up, but then life kind of mimics his stories. It's wild that he ended up with a German wife, considering all those claims from years ago. Guess he really was living a bit of that narrative after all. It's cool to see how people evolve from their childhood tales into real-life experiences, even if it sounds far-fetched back then. Weird in a good way, really. He was simply too smart. In a high school with many smart kids, suburban high school in a wealthy area with 99% going to college and lots of kids going to Ivies and high academic publics, he still stood way above us. I looked him up not too long ago as we were talking whatever happened to. Not a surprise, I guess, he is involved in deep space research. Has a couple fellowships and writes papers about stuff that I can't even understand the titles. Sounds about right for someone that smart. It's always interesting to see where people end up. In a crowd of overachievers, he was just on another level. Deep space research is no joke either. It's cool that he's still pushing boundaries and working on things that most of us can't wrap our heads around. Makes you wonder what else is out there. Adam. He was just weird. Like, kinda dumb, and just weird. I remember at grade 8 graduation I met his dad. Thought, wow, I've never known a kid to look so exactly like his dad before. Then I met his mother and realized he looked exactly like her, too. It sounds like Adam was a unique character for sure. It's interesting how some people look so much like their parents. You kind of wonder if their personalities are shaped by that resemblance. I've met people like that too, where you just can't shake the feeling they are a reflection of their family. It adds a different layer to how we see them growing up. Kid smelled like he bathed in cat pee every day. Hissed at anyone who came near him. Used to run through the hallways from class to class. Threatened to kill me in a computer lab because I used Internet Explorer instead of Firefox. Sounds like that kid had a pretty intense vibe. The whole cat pee thing is a whole level of distracting. Running through hallways and hissing at people? Definitely not your average school experience. And threatening over a browser choice? That's a new one. Just goes to show how passionate some people can be about their tech preferences. For the school-wide talent show, he put a plastic bag on the back of his head on which he had hastily scribbled something resembling a smiley face. He faced away from the audience and touched his hands behind his back. That was his talent, touching his hands behind his back. That sounds like something a friend of mine would do. He never took himself too seriously in school, always looking for a laugh. One time, he wore a ridiculous outfit for a project and acted like it was a serious presentation. Everyone was confused but couldn't help but laugh. He just had this way of making simple things entertaining, even if his talents were, well, pretty unconventional. There was this girl a few years older than me who thought she was a werewolf among other things. As you can imagine, a lot of kids who made fun of her. She was a sweetheart once you got to know her though. I'm not an expert, but I always wondered if she went through some super traumatic event when she was little that triggered some of her behaviors. It's interesting how people can express themselves in unique ways. I remember a classmate who wore a cape to school and acted like a superhero. At first, others laughed, but I realized there was more to his story. He had a tough home life and used this persona to cope. It makes you think about how we all have our struggles, just like that girl. It's easy to judge, but sometimes, there's a deeper reason behind the behavior. There was a kid in my school who was obsessed with Mario. He had Mario sweatshirts and notebooks, and a Mario backpack. Well, someone figured out that if you told him Mario is dead, he'd flip. Scream and cry fuck you know he's not every time. He got in trouble multiple times for attacking kids who said anything about Mario dying, even if they were talking about in the context of Smash Brothers or something. This happened 8th to 10th grade, then I never saw him again. That kid sounds like he really took Mario's world seriously. I guess when something means so much to you, it can be tough to hear it get disrespected. I can imagine the chaos in school whenever someone brought it up. I hope he found a place where he could celebrate Mario without anyone bothering him. Kids can be intense about their interests sometimes. One kid loved trains and drew them regularly. He was crazy talented with regard to the drawings. They were incredibly detailed, but it's all he ever talked about. Another kid loved being called Booger and dated the girl who pissed her pants in a couple of classes. They enjoyed public shows of affection. The first kid had this obsession with trains, like he could spend hours just sketching them. His passion was impressive, but it got a bit much since it was the only topic he knew. Meanwhile, the other kid was all about being goofy. Calling himself Booger made him happy, and he didn't mind dating someone who had those embarrassing moments. Their vibes were different, but they all just rolled with it. Autism plus growing up in a cult equals high. I had serious social issues. I'm well on my way to being old and still weird. Not in a cult though. Left that behind decades ago. Can I talk to you for several hours about native plants, textile arts, cults, or one of my other special interests? LOL. It's interesting how growing up in that environment shapes your experiences. I get the social issues part. It can be hard to relate to others. Special interests can really help, though. It's cool that you've found things like native plants and textile arts to connect with. Everyone has their own path, and it seems like you've moved away from that past. Just keep exploring what you love. Man, almost 40 years later this still bothers me. His name was Stuart, and he was the school weirdo. Possibly on the spectrum, which wasn't really a thing back then, and for some reason everyone picked on him. To be fair, I tried to reach out a couple of times, and he wasn't interested. Perhaps after a short lifetime of being picked on made him wary of anyone appearing friendly. We came back from Christmas break to the news that on Christmas Eve, as his parents walked through the door, he put a shotgun in his mouth and pulled the trigger. I know there was more to the story, and that we were all just kids, but there were times I was shitty to him and I still feel bad about. The whole thing low-key haunts me to this day. That's a tough story to carry. It's rough reflecting on how things played out when we were kids. You want to help, but sometimes people aren't ready for it. Stuart's situation is a reminder of how being picked on can affect someone deeply. It's easy to look back and wish we handled things differently. The weight of those memories can linger for a long time. It's clear you didn't want to be part of the problem. He responded to everything with "I know you are, but what my I?" regardless of whatever was said. Eventually people just stopped trying to talk to him. I remember seeing him sitting alone and asking if he wanted to sit with us, and he replied, "I know you are, but what am I?" I said, "Millimeter, yeah, but do you want to come join us?" "I know you are, but what am I?" "I'm being serious, come join us, I know you are, but what am I?" "Okay, never mind, I know you are, but what am I?" That guy was something else. It was like he had a one-liner for everything, no matter how serious it got. I remember trying to get him to join our group, but he just kept going back to that line. After a while, it felt pointless. I mean, talking to him was like talking to a wall. Funny at first, but it just got old. Guess he was in his own world. He was generally quiet but would make these weird comments about his bold ma, ranging from concerning to mind-boggling. Can't remember specifics, this was all 10+ years ago, but the gist of it was she was a very strict, New Age religious, UFO conspiracist nut who'd covered their windows in aluminium foil and had a shrine in her house. Everyone felt kinda bad for him and assumed he was probably being abused. His younger brother joins the same high school in our final year, and word gets out their family is completely normal and the dude just likes to lie. That's an interesting story. It's wild how sometimes people create these elaborate tales. It makes you wonder why he felt the need to exaggerate about his family. The contrast with his younger brother showing up and revealing the truth must have shocked a lot of people. It's a reminder that appearances can be misleading, and not everything is what it seems on the surface. People have their reasons, I guess. There was a homely guy in middle school the kids used to bully. Something happened to his neck and for a while he walked around the hallways with his right ear close to his right shoulder. Between classes, all the kids en route to their next class would imitate him, heads leaning to the right side. So obnoxious, he was a nice kid. It's rough when kids don't get it. I remember a classmate who got picked on for just being different. Everyone thought it was funny to mimic him. He was chill, just trying to get through school like everyone else. Sometimes, the nice ones end up getting hurt the most. Those memories stick around, we all learn and grow. Hope he's doing better now. We had a couple. One thought he was a vampire. Wore a cape, fangs, dressed in black, the whole thing. Kept it up throughout high school. Dunno what happened to him. The other was a German exchange student who looked like a Hansen brother. He was just odd. I don't think it was that he was foreign, it's that he just had really dated clothes and generally acted awkward. Looking back, he was a nice kid, but it was likely autism. That's an interesting combo for a couple. The vampire guy must have really committed to the bit if he kept it up through high school. The German exchange student sounds like he had his own quirks. It's funny how we remember people for these little things that stand out, like fashion choices or behaviors. It's cool he was nice, though. Those kinds of friendships can be pretty unique in their own way. This was in elementary school. She loved to draw wolves. She was so talented, I would sit with her at times and watch her draw during our breaks. Kids were not kind to her and made fun of her for it. Sad face. That's a tough situation. It's strange how kids can be. She had a real gift, and it's a shame others couldn't see that. I remember feeling the same way watching a friend create. Art can be a refuge, even if others don't appreciate it. It's nice you supported her by just being there, though. Sometimes, a little kindness can make a big difference. There were two of them. The first had impulse control issues, so he was frequently acting out and sent to the principal's office. He was eventually expelled for biting a teacher and student. The other was mostly just a band-A theater kid without an outlet. He was extremely extroverted and loved a spectacle. One of his shticks was to wear a cape and twirl down the hallway, exclaiming, "Wonder Woman." He would also spontaneously burst into song. Don't remember his full repertoire, but one of his go-to songs was Modern Major General. I always secretly liked his self-confidence and how unashamed he was about it all. But to my shame, I succumbed to peer pressure and harassed him with the rest of my peers. However, he never seemed to care or act bothered by it. Outwardly, he was always pretty jovial all the time. He eventually went on to join local politics and seems to have done relatively well. It's interesting how personalities can clash in school. I remember this one kid who would just get kicked out for his wild behavior. Then there was the theater kid, full of life and confidence, always performing. I admired him but ended up going along with the crowd and teasing him. Still, he didn't let it get to him. Turns out, he channeled that energy into local politics and seems to be doing well now. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.